I stepped off the plane and into the arrivals terminal at Cedar Ridge Regional Airport. It was a small airport, the kind with coffee-stained carpets and vending machines that hadn't been restocked since spring. The air inside smelled like recycled stories in old air conditioning. I walked slowly, carrying nothing but a worn satchel and the weight of 3 decades. Families gathered near the glass doors. Balloons bobbed. Phones rose like salutes. Someone squealed and threw her arms around a man in uniform. An elderly couple embraced their granddaughter near baggage claim. Eyes wet, shoulders trembling. I kept walking. No one was waiting. No flags. No cameras. No hands reaching for mine. Just the rhythm of my boots against the tile. A hollow percussion, echoing louder than it should have. I didn't need a reception. That part was never for me. Across the terminal, 3 uniformed men stood laughing near a flight information screen. They were Air Force. I knew the insignias, the posture, the ease with which they leaned into the moment. They hadn't noticed me. I paused. One of them looked my way. A junior officer, clean-shaved, straight shoulders. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before sliding past, uninterested. If he recognized me, he didn't show it. No salute. No nod. I had been gone 5 days, Brussels, a quiet NATO meeting, briefings behind closed doors. It was the kind of mission where nothing is said publicly, and everything changes privately. I carried the last encrypted update in a hardened tablet under lock and dual authentication. It hadn't left my side. And now, after 30 years in uniform, I was walking through an airport like a woman whose presence didn't matter. I kept my chin high. I had been saluted by generals and grilled by foreign diplomats. I'd spoken in war rooms where the air smelled of nerves and printer ink. But here, in this terminal, I was just another black woman in civilian clothes. I didn't look back. I headed for the garage. 11 minutes later, I reached the second floor of the parking structure. The wind moved through the concrete pillars like a whisper too old to matter. I was 2 steps from my rental car when I heard footsteps. Quick, hard. 2 men. Then 3. No uniforms. No badges visible. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." I turned slowly. "Can I help you?" They didn't answer. One grabbed my wrist. Another moved behind me. My back hit the pillar. Handcuffs. Cold. Fast. I stayed silent. Not compliant, intentional. Their hands were rough. They hadn't asked for ID. No verification. They didn't check the case number on my federal credentials. A third officer, younger, red hair, plain clothes, seized my tablet. "You can't take that," I said, calm but sharp. "It's classified." "She's bluffing," someone muttered. I tried again. "Colonel Amelia Carter. USAF, retired. Clearance Echo 9. That's a NATO-linked device." They didn't flinch. That's when I knew it wasn't misunderstanding. It was disbelief. They weren't ignoring protocol. They couldn't imagine that someone like me could hold it. That knowledge, who I was, what I carried, it didn't register. My wrists ached. Not from the metal. From the truth of it. 12 minutes ago, I walked through arrivals unnoticed. Now I was under arrest in a garage because no one believed what they refused to see. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. 30 years in intelligence taught me that words mean little to people who aren't listening. So I stood still, cuffed against a concrete pillar, the wind stirring the hem of my coat like it was trying to wake the world. The plainclothes officers moved with conviction, but not precision. No radio calls. No Miranda rights. No badge numbers offered. One of them checked my wallet, tossed it back like it was empty. They hadn't seen the small credentials tag tucked behind the leather panel. The same one that gave me base access at Langley. "You're obstructing federal property," one of them said, as if the line made sense. I said nothing. That's when I saw him, moving fast across the parking structure. Tall, dark suit, clipped gait. Captain Marcus Hall. He had been my aide-de-camp during my final active years. A good officer. Steady. Still called me ma'am even after retirement. I hadn't told him I was landing today, but somehow he knew. "Colonel Carter," he shouted. The officer stiffened. He reached us quickly, breath-controlled, jaw clenched. He took one look at me. The cuffs, the tablet now in a stranger's hand, and stopped like someone had slammed him in the chest. "What the hell is this?" Marcus demanded. "She's a retired colonel. You need to uncuff her. Now." The lead officer held up a hand, arrogant and tired. "Step back, sir. This doesn't concern you. She's carrying NATO-classified intel under a diplomatic travel exception, and you've just detained her without probable cause." "She refused to identify herself," the officer replied. "Because you never asked," Marcus snapped. "You didn't even run her ID." I saw the shift in his eyes, that moment when anger turns tactical. He reached into his coat, pulled out a slim black case, tapped a code. His fingers moved fast. "This is Captain Hall. Activating silent echo. Confirm credentials. Colonel Amelia J. Carter. Echo 9 clearance. Brussels directive. Civilian classification with active escort flag." He spoke fast, clear. His voice hit like an alarm bell. The lead officer blinked. "What's silent echo?" "You'll find out in 5 minutes, Marcus said coldly. They didn't believe him, just like they hadn't believed me. I watched their certainty waver. The air grew quiet. 3 minutes later, the first vehicle pulled into the garage, black SUV, no plates. Another followed. A DS liaison stepped out first, short, grim, dressed like a man who skipped weekends. Then behind him, a figure I hadn't seen in years. Lieutenant General Serena Fisk. I'd briefed her in Kandahar. She had once called me her operational North Star. Now she was walking toward me, sharp in her blues, eyes blazing. "Who detained her?" Fisk asked. None of the officers answered. "She didn't wait. Release her. Immediately." Silence. Her voice hardened. "This woman advised 5 federal agencies last month. She walked out of a NATO security room less than 72 hours ago. And you put her in handcuffs in a parking garage?" Still no movement. So Marcus stepped forward, reached over, and undid the cuff on my left wrist himself. Fisk watched him, then said, "Get the right angle." A body camera was lifted. A nearby surveillance cam realigned. One of the officers held up a phone. She let him record it. The second cuff fell away. I didn't rub my wrists. I didn't flinch. I turned toward the camera, held the tablet in both hands, then nodded once. That was all I needed, the record. Fisk stepped beside me. "Colonel Carter, would you like to file a formal complaint?" "No," I said. "Just make sure the footage remains public record." She nodded. Her jaw clenched. "Understood." We walked away together, Marcus, Fisk, and I, the concrete swallowing the sound of our steps. The officers didn't follow. They just stood there, quiet now, stripped of the confidence that had once made their hands so quick on the cuffs. Inside the car, Marcus didn't speak for a while. He kept his eyes on the road, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I shouldn't have let you walk alone," he finally said. "You didn't let me," I replied. "I chose to." He glanced over. "It still shouldn't have happened." "It did." I stared out the window. The airport faded behind us, but the moment wouldn't. Not quickly. Not ever. The truth wasn't complicated. I had no insignia. No uniform. Just civilian clothes and a dark complexion in the wrong space. They hadn't seen a colonel. They'd seen a silhouette they didn't understand. By nightfall, the footage had circulated. It started small, a leak to a veteran's blog with a grainy clip from the body cam. Then a tweet from a military historian with the words, "This is Colonel Amelia Carter. Watch what they did to her." By midnight, a national outlet picked it up. Then another. The headline beneath my image was clean and clinical. "Retired USAF Colonel detained without cause at Cedar Ridge Airport." But the story didn't need many words. The video spoke for itself. Me standing there, wrists cuffed, back to a pillar, voice calm. Then the footage of a lieutenant general arriving, the sudden shift in posture from the officers, the silence that followed. I didn't watch it. I didn't need to. The phone rang early. Congressman Ruiz. Then a call from the Secretary of the Air Force. Everyone wanted statements, apologies, assurances that this did not reflect institutional values. Each one sounded like it had been rehearsed years ago, waiting on a shelf for a woman like me to fit the script. Marcus stayed at my side that morning. He brewed coffee in silence, then handed me the cup without asking how I liked it. We'd spent 2 deployments together, Afghanistan, Bahrain. He knew I drank it black when something sat heavy on my chest. "You're trending," he said. I nodded once. "I didn't ask to be." He pulled out his phone, scrolled, then showed me a still image, my arms outstretched, waiting for the cuffs to fall, my face neutral. "They're calling it the Cedar Ridge incident," he said. I took the phone and looked at the image. It didn't move me. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was expected. "Let them call it what they want," I said. "Names don't change the bones of a thing." He nodded, set the phone down. That afternoon, I received the official request to appear before a congressional panel. They called it a non-adversarial inquiry. That was the term they used when they needed public reassurance without admitting public failure. I accepted without hesitation. The next morning, I stood in front of a mirror in my guest quarters and put on a charcoal suit. No medals, no pins, just clean lines and sharp fabric. The same way I dressed in every room where words mattered more than rank. My flight left just after dawn. Marcus rode with me to the airport again. He didn't ask if I was ready. He knew the answer. The terminal looked different now, or maybe I did. No one stopped me. No one looked through me. The same glass doors opened, the same announcements echoed through the space. But there was a weight in the air. Something had shifted. People watched me now. Not with awe, not with fear. With attention. It's a strange thing, to be seen after so long of being misread. Washington was colder than I remembered. The hearing room even more so. Marble walls. Rows of chairs. The smell of coffee that had been poured and forgotten. My name was already printed at the front table. Colonel Amelia Carter, Ret. I sat. The panel began. They asked questions. About that night. About what had been said. About why I didn't declare my identity louder. One congressman leaned forward, frustrated. "Why didn't you assert your credentials more directly? Surely that would have resolved this faster." I looked him in the eye. Not unkindly, just clearly. "Because I've learned," I said, "that some people don't hear credentials when they come from a voice like mine." The room stilled. I continued. I didn't resist. I didn't escalate. I didn't beg. Because I shouldn't have to shout to be believed. I shouldn't have to explain 30 years of service just to be treated with basic decency. I paused. When assumptions become policy, presence doesn't matter. Only perception. They shifted in their seats. Another member of the panel asked about the officers who detained me. "I'm not here to destroy careers," I said. "I'm here to expose habits." This wasn't a single failure. It was a reflection. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then I closed with this. When you cannot imagine a woman as a colonel, when you cannot picture a black woman as the carrier of sensitive state intelligence, the failure isn't hers. It's yours. The system doesn't need retraining. It needs re-seeing. They thanked me. Some with words. Others with silence. I gathered my things. No fanfare. No applause. Just the same weight I'd always carried. But now the floor had heard it echo. Outside, Marcus waited on the sidewalk, leaning against the car. I didn't speak. He didn't ask. But in his eyes I saw it, not pity, not rage, respect. Not because of what happened to me, but because of how I stood through it. The report came out 4 weeks later. 316 pages. It detailed procedural failures at Cedar Ridge Airport, listed by timestamp and camera angle. But the real indictment wasn't in the facts. It was in the footnotes. Officer did not request identification. No verification call was placed. Suspect presumed non-affiliated due to dress and appearance. Presumed. That word appeared 11 times. Presumed unimportant. Presumed unaffiliated. Presumed threat. The Department of Homeland Security issued an apology. The Air Force issued a statement. The airport authority issued nothing, just silence. But the ripple effect began anyway. Across federal agencies, a review panel was formed, Equity and Recognition Protocols. A bland title, but I knew what it meant. It meant they were finally watching themselves. 2 officers resigned before the review was complete. A third requested transfer. I didn't ask for that. I didn't need them punished. I needed the next black woman in that airport not to be erased in plain sight. That was enough. The day after the hearing, I went back to my regular work. No interviews. No memoir announcements. Just a return to what I'd done quietly for years. Mentor junior officers, speak at vet centers, Review policy drafts no one else wanted to touch. The news cycle had already moved on. Somewhere, a politician had said something inflammatory. Somewhere else, a celebrity had broken up with another. The world didn't linger long on quiet injustice. It preferred noise, preferably packaged and resolved in under 6 minutes. But at the air bases, the ROTC classrooms, and the veteran community centers, they hadn't forgotten. Neither had I. A week after the panel, I was invited to speak at the Air War College in Montgomery. They wanted a lecture on post-command leadership. I said yes, but on my own terms. No publicity. No recording. Just a closed room and an open chair. That morning I arrived early, walked the long hallway past the portraits. All men. All white. All framed in oak. I didn't stop. Inside the lecture room, 40 students sat in silence as I entered. I didn't clear my throat or open with rank. I began with this. Leadership, I said, is how you move when no one is looking, and how you respond when everyone is. They straightened in their seats. I gave no slides. Just stories. Quiet ones. About moments behind closed doors. About the time a young pilot cracked under pressure and I didn't report him, I coached him. About the night a translator we'd worked with was denied a visa, and I personally flew to Ankara to get her cleared. About silence, and what it can cost. Afterward, a young captain approached me, her uniform crisp, her eyes uncertain. "Colonel Carter," she said, "what do you do when people don't see you?" I looked at her, saw myself decades ago trying not to ask the same question. "You walk anyway," I said. "You walk anyway until the floor learns your name." That night, I returned to my quarters, wrote 2 letters. One was to General Fisk, thanking her for how she arrived, and how she didn't let it slide. The other was to the mother of the youngest officer on that panel. He had been quiet during the hearing, respectful but uncertain. I had learned later he was the son of a seamstress and a retired postal worker, first in his family to wear a suit with a congressional badge. In the letter I wrote, "He listened when it mattered. You raised him well. I never mailed it, but I keep it in my desk drawer." A reminder that not all accountability has to be loud. 2 months later, the Air Force adopted a new directive, Recognition Readiness Protocol, mandating that all federal security interactions with prior military personnel include credential checks before escalation. It wasn't perfect. No policy is. But it was something. One morning I returned to Cedar Ridge Airport. I wore jeans, a dark sweater, my boots from the service. Marcus met me outside baggage claim, holding a thermos of black coffee. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I need to walk it one more time," I said. We went to the garage. Level 2. The concrete still bore faint stains from rainwater and oil. I stopped at the pillar, the same one I had been cuffed against. "This is where it happened?" a voice asked. We turned. A group of ROTC cadets stood nearby, local students. Clean uniforms. Nervous hands. I nodded. "Yes." They circled quietly. I told them the story, not with anger, not with drama, just the facts, and the silence that followed. Then I pointed to the spot where the tablet had fallen. "Right here," I said. "That's where it hit." They didn't know what it was, just that it didn't look like something a woman like me should be carrying. One of the cadets, a young man with a southern accent, asked, "Did they ever apologize?" "Some did," I said. "But apology isn't the same as understanding." They nodded. I placed my hand on the pillar, felt its rough surface, then turned to them. "When assumptions become louder than presence, dignity disappears," I said. "Don't let that happen on your watch." They stood still, listening. One of the cadets saluted, then another. I didn't return it, not because I didn't respect them, because I wanted them to remember the difference between protocol and truth. Salutes are easy. Seeing someone, that takes work. The next season came and went without ceremony. Autumn settled across the base installations like an old coat, soft, familiar, fraying in places. Leaves gathered outside the mess halls and chapel doors. Flags hung still more often than they flew. The silence of fall always reminded me of deployments, the moments between missions, when the world seemed suspended, waiting. But something had shifted. It wasn't loud. It moved through inboxes, through briefings, through minor memos at the bottom of morning slides. Captains began adding a slide at the end of their decks labeled bias interruption. ROTC instructors started assigning essays on command humility. And once, at a training installation in Mississippi, a senior NCO added an extra 30 minutes to the security protocol module. The title? Colonel Carter Scenario. I hadn't asked for that. Didn't particularly want it. But the story had grown legs, moved past my name. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what the system had failed to see, and what it was still trying haltingly to correct. One morning in January, I received a thick envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten block letters. Inside, 15 folded notes, each on stationery from different bases. No introductions. No signatures. Just words. From a young Air Force lieutenant in Nevada. I stopped a field briefing today to make sure every voice in the room was heard, not just the loud ones. I remembered you. From a civilian contractor in Georgia. We changed our identification protocol. Everyone now gets a first-look review before escalation. Quiet respect, we call it. You taught us that. From a master sergeant in Okinawa. I told my team to look twice before assuming. I used your story to explain why. And from a cadet I'd never met. Colonel Carter, we study you now. Not for how you fought wars, but for how you stood still. I sat with those notes for a long time. Let them breathe. Didn't file them away. Didn't frame them. Just kept them nearby as reminders. I never wanted fame. I wanted clarity. I wanted the people who looked past someone like me to stop doing it. That was all. One day, I received an invitation from a base commander in Colorado Springs. They were holding a symposium on integrity in uniform. He wanted me to keynote. I declined. Instead, I sent a single-page letter to be read aloud. Said this: sometimes the most important thing a uniform can do is step back and see who's standing in front of it. Not everything powerful looks familiar. Not every leader looks like the last one. And if you can't recognize strength in its quietest form, then you aren't ready to lead. I heard later that when the letter was read, the room fell completely silent, not out of reverence, but because silence was what the story had always been about. Not the handcuffs, not the garage, but the silence around those things, the stillness in which injustice hides. In February, I visited an old friend, a former Navy intelligence officer who had relocated to a quiet town in Maine. We had coffee on his porch, the Atlantic wind turning our coats into sails. You still carrying it? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead I said, some weights don't get lighter. You just stop resenting them. He nodded. You think they'll change? He asked. They already are, I said. But change isn't the victory. Awareness is. He looked at me, then laughed softly. You always did speak like someone writing their own doctrine. Someone has to. Later that day, I visited a veterans memorial tucked behind a town library. There was a bench with no names on it, just an inscription. To those we overlooked but never should have. I sat there for a long time. No press. No cameras. Just wind, pine needles, and the distant sound of children playing. And I thought, maybe that's the real legacy, not policy, not statements, not reforms, but spaces. Spaces where the unseen are remembered, the unheard are invited, the misjudged are given the benefit of the doubt. Spaces where you don't have to prove you belong. You just do. A month later, I was asked to return to Cedar Ridge for a quiet internal review session. No press, no public. Just me and a room of airport security personnel. The same kind who once dragged me into silence. I said yes. Not out of obligation. Out of clarity. The room was quiet when I entered. Some faces were familiar. Some avoided eye contact. But most just waited. I told them the story. Plainly. Without flourish. I told them how it felt to be reduced in seconds. How assumptions work faster than facts. How the truth doesn't always wear a uniform. Then I paused. Let the air settle. I'm not here to scold, I said. I'm here to ask a question. I waited, then asked. When someone doesn't look like who you expect, what do you do next? No one answered. That was the point. Spring returned like it always does, slowly, then all at once. Cherry blossoms lined the walkways of Cedar Ridge Veterans Park, the petals shedding like pages from a story only a few had taken the time to read. I walked there often, not to be seen, just to remember. Every few weeks a new letter would arrive. One came from the Office of Inspector General. They were expanding internal training modules using a new case study. The subject line read simply, Carter Case Application. Another from a mid-level officer in the Coast Guard. I briefed a room of young recruits today. Told them about your silence. Not your resume. Just the silence. They listened. I didn't write back. But I kept every word. Some days the public had moved on. The news cycle forgot me. The stories faded to the archives. But beneath that, in the pulse of institutions, in the footnotes of new SOPs, in quiet conversations between junior and senior staff, I had not vanished. That was the win. Not glory. Not legacy. Just endurance. One morning, a woman I had never met approached me at a bookstore in D.C. She wore plain clothes, no badge, no insignia. Just eyes that knew something most people didn't say out loud. Colonel Carter? I turned. I was one of the analysts who used to read your intelligence reports in Kabul, she said. We never met. But your clarity saved a lot of people. I nodded. Thank you. She hesitated. What they did to you? I stopped her gently. What they did revealed more than it damaged. She blinked. But you could have, you didn't sue. You didn't go on television. No, I said. I went back to work. She didn't know what to say. That was okay. Some truths don't ask for a reply. That evening I stood alone outside the same parking garage. Level 2. Same pillar. Same light flickering overhead. This time no cuffs. No officers. Just the memory of what silence used to cost. And I thought about every woman who'd been mistaken for less. Every soldier overlooked because their skin, their gait, their volume didn't match the idea of command someone had grown comfortable with. I thought of the files misfiled, the doors not held open, the names that disappeared beneath incorrect assumptions and unchecked eyes. I thought of every quiet strength that had to hold still long enough to be heard. And I thought of who I used to be before this. A woman who carried plans, commanded units, signed off on operations that never made the news. A woman who had once believed that dignity was enough if you walked correctly and waited patiently. Now I knew better. Dignity isn't something the world grants. It's what you carry when no one else will. I heard steps behind me. Marcus. He'd driven down from Langley. Didn't say much. Just stood with me. Hands in his pockets. Looking out over the lot. You know, he said after a while, the new onboarding module for counterintelligence officers? It includes a screening exercise named after you. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of exercise? They show a photo of a black woman in civilian clothes entering a secure area with a NATO credential. The question is, who is she? I laughed quietly. And half of them get it wrong, he said. At first. I looked back at the pillar. Well, I said, at least now they're being asked the question. Later we sat in my car. The sky turned purple over Cedar Ridge. A local station ran a piece about the new airport directive. No names were mentioned, just a list of changes, better ID training, revised escalation standards, quarterly anti-bias reviews. That was enough. Real change doesn't arrive with headlines. It arrives when the next woman like me walks through a terminal and doesn't have to explain who she is before being respected. It arrives when no one second-guesses whether she belongs. When the room pauses long enough to listen before it acts. The next morning I spoke at a civilian leadership course. Not military. Not federal. Just city workers. Public servants. The ones whose choices shape the small, daily ecosystems where respect either lives or dies. They asked me what I learned. I said, power isn't what you show. It's what you withhold until the moment matters. And presence, true presence, doesn't always announce itself, but it shifts the room anyway. Someone asked if I forgave the officers who detained me. I said, forgiveness isn't the point. Clarity is. They wrote that down. Weeks passed. Then months. I declined more panels. Ignored interview requests. My face faded from public circulation. Good. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the next cadet who walks into a command meeting and refuses to be ignored, to the transportation worker who double-checks a badge instead of drawing a conclusion, to the junior security officer who chooses de-escalation over assumption, because they remember what happened to a woman who stood still and waited to be seen. Not every legacy is visible, but some are permanent anyway. They live in protocol, in posture, in pause. I returned to Cedar Ridge one last time. No press, no escort, just me. It was late afternoon. The sun leaned sideways through the upper windows, casting long shadows between the pillars. The air smelled faintly of dust and rubber, the scent of a place too ordinary to carry history. But history had happened here, and I needed to see it again, not as memory, but as witness. I wore jeans, a dark sweater, no makeup, no symbols of rank, just a quiet readiness. By the pillar, a small group of ROTC cadets waited. They stood respectfully, not out of duty, but something older, something closer to reverence. I walked up slowly, let them take in the space. "This is where it happened," I said. They looked around, concrete cracks, faint tire marks. Ordinary, but I pointed to the ground. Right there. That's where the tablet hit. One cadet knelt beside the scuff mark, touched it lightly. Another adjusted their posture. Stillness spread through them, unspoken. I stepped beside the pillar. "People think disrespect is loud," I said. "But it's often quiet. It shows itself in what isn't said, what isn't done." No eye contact. No question asked. They nodded. I placed a hand on the pillar. My voice stayed low. "Composure isn't weakness," I said. "It's strength that doesn't perform." They listened. No questions. Just breath held. Then I added softly, "It wasn't about proving power. It was about showing that silence can be its own kind of clarity." One of the cadets asked carefully, "Do you ever wish you had shouted? Said more?" I looked at them. I said exactly what needed saying, just not the way they expected to hear it. The cadets stood still, then saluted. This time I returned it, not for ceremony, but for understanding. We left the garage in silence, not heavy, not bitter, just full. A silence that no longer erased anything. It revealed everything. And that was enough. Brasit ChatGPT.